At its founding, there was no Pledge of Allegiance. There was no loyalty oath recited by children. There was no purity culture around flags or symbols or forced reverence. There was no demand that love of country be loud, performative, or unquestioning. There was no test of patriotism that required obedience to a government rather than fidelity to an idea. All of that came later, long after the founding, long after the arguments, long after the blood, ink, and doubt. It came as a tool to simplify, to sanitize, to indoctrinate, to teach people to worship the surface of America while forgetting the substance of it. Because America was never a government. It was never a building or a flag or a temporary collection of people holding office. America is an idea. It's fragile and radical and dangerous. An idea about how to best expand liberty. An idea that assumes power will always fail. An idea that insists authority must be questioned. An idea that survives only when ordinary people are willing to defend it. The country wasn't founded by polished men in powdered wigs alone. That's the version we tell ourselves because it's easier to manage. But the United States was born in disagreement. It took years to arrive at the Constitution that we know from 1787. Years of argument, years of doubt, years of essays and letters and journals that tell us in minute detail how fiercely the founders struggled with one another. Some of the brightest minds of their time argued relentlessly about representation and power and slavery and the limits of government. And those disagreements weren't flaws, they're the whole point. America was never meant to be unanimous, it was meant to be contested, alive, and unfinished. That's why America was founded by people like Rene Good and Alex Preddy. Not because they sought martyrdom, not because they imagined themselves as symbols, but because they lived inside the original American instinct that recognizes when power has slipped too far from conscience. That instinct that knows authority exists to serve human dignity, not to crush it. That instinct that has always terrified empires and always will. Because the revolution didn't begin with declarations. It began with unease, with neighbors talking too long in doorways, with discomfort that settled into the chest and refused to leave. It began with crowds, with boycotts, and with protests, with people standing shoulder to shoulder against authority that had grown distant, violent, and convinced of its own righteousness. So the streets of Minnesota are not a historical reenactment. They are not theater. They are not cosplay. They are the living continuation of the American experiment. The moment when citizens look at the machinery of the state and say, this is not who we are. This is not what liberty looks like, and this will not be done quietly. The American Revolution was not tidy. It was loud and frightening and unresolved. It was fueled by grief and anger and love.